Hey guys, welcome back to another Explorer V8 wiring harness episode. In the last episode we went over some of the differences between the 96 to 01 Explorer harness and what they changed through the years. So we were just looking at this engine. It might look familiar to some of you. And I have the harness out of it, so I figured I'd show you like the transmission connector and the injector connectors. Anyways, we went over that. Today I want to go over some of the actual engine bay harness differences. So what you would need to get your Explorer ECU swap running. Now, this is not a complete, I'm not an expert in this wiring. This is not a complete guide or anything. If you guys have questions, if you have anything that I'm not covering or you aren't sure about, feel free to leave a comment. I'll try to answer it. Like I've said before, my truck's a 98. Everything works, all the gauges and everything, and it's now running on a 351, which blew up a couple times this year, 3 to be exact. But this video is not about that. So today we're going to talk about the starting AC and the PATS information on the different Explorer harnesses and ECUs. So my favorite to use is going to be the 99 to 01. Obviously my truck's a 98, so anytime you can keep the ECU matching the chassis that it's going in, your problems are going to be much fewer than if you mismatch years. So we've already seen that with the injectors and some of the other sensors on the 302. And what I want to cover right now actually is another one that I left off. Returning to the 302 harness, the thing I wanted to mention to you guys that I didn't say anything about last time is actually because I had forgotten until I was looking at my truck the other day and noticed that this mass airflow plug that's on the Explorer harness was missing 2 wires on mine. So the reason for that is because the later Explorers built this intake air temp sensor into the airflow meter itself, same like this slot style here. It was an integrated airflow sensor with your intake air temp sensor. And in the earlier ones, and I don't know what year they changed over, but in the earlier ones they actually had that sensor separate, so it was mounted on the intake pipe. And I actually prefer to keep it that way because if you see where this intake air temp sensor is right next to the engine, it tends to heat soak really bad. So on my truck I have the intercooler like right about up here, and my intake air temp sensor is out of the engine bay, so that helps with the heat soak. So that was the one thing that I wanted to tell you guys about with that. On the ECU side of things, this is the one I like to use. This is EQE. The last number is actually not important on this. EQE 1 through 5 is 99 to 01. The ones that I use happen to be EQE 3. But this is a PATS equipped computer. It's made for a returnless fuel system, and also there is some differences in the transmission wiring. So remember, this is the transmission plug back here. I think it's a 32 pin as I recall. That gray one down there. So I'm not going to go over that because I have no experience with automatic transmissions. What I am going to go over though is the PATS. So 9901, like I said, has PATS. 98 was the first year of PATS, and 96 and 97 do not have it. So if you're looking to swap into a earlier chassis, I would recommend the 96 to 97, mainly because it has a return style fuel system. So the 99 to 01 EQEs, they use a single feed line. So this is a single feed line. They have a regulator in the tank, and in 98 I believe they switched to the returnless as well. So that's the fuel system differences and PATS. Now as far as the starting circuit, this is the plug that goes to the truck. We've mentioned this guy before. I believe it's a 42 pin, and this wire right here. So in the manuals this wire is jumped on the engine side of this plug. On the autos, this actually goes to a park transmission range sensor, and in order to get this key to actually turn the starter, you have to wire these together. It doesn't matter which side you wire them together on. This is a 98 harness right here, and these are the 2 colors you want. So it's like a pink wire, and then I think that one's like a tan with a red, maybe. Correct me if I'm wrong, but anyways, those have to be wired together, otherwise you'll turn the starter. Even with no PATS equipped, you'll turn the starter and nothing will happen. So that is to make your starter work. And the next plug I want to mention has a story behind it. So it's this guy right here, and actually I have it cut out of here. And in case you're wondering, it's because this is the plug that actually left me stranded in another video. I mentioned this. Reason being, you can see that sorry wiring. Guys, don't do this. This one originally was covering the two wires, but I had too short of a wire, so it pulled it back. And then these other ones, just not good wiring. So I have replaced that. Now, the story behind this plug, though, is that this is the original from my truck. And on the truck side, which is this side, this is for the starter solenoid. Two of these wires control the AC clutch. Two of them look at the pressure sensor on the condenser. So my truck did not have air conditioning originally, so what I ended up doing was adding these wires. And of course, I mean, they lasted 10 years, but eventually that's what happened. I never really had it in a good spot because these were down near the turbo. So to fix that, I have moved mine up here. Now this is a whole different connector, just some random junkyard plug, but now it's up out of the way. Guys, you don't need to do anything with this plug. If you're trying to get your vehicle to start, it's not this starter solenoid wire you need to look at. It's actually the one I just showed you in your vehicle side, or you could make that same jumper in your engine side plug. Now, one thing to mention though about this is that your truck AC system will depend on what computer you're using. So the earlier ones actually had a different logic that drives it. Now, I don't know off the top of my head, I can't tell you how that worked, but I can tell you, when I ran an earlier ECU, either a 97 or a 98, with my truck, the AC condenser was running all the time. So you do not want that. That's one thing to look out for. I'm not going to cover it now. If any of you guys need to know how that's done, let me know. Alright guys, a few more things on the wiring harness. So I do love this Explorer EFI because that is the complete engine management harness right there. That's it. It's all in front of you. So I mentioned this before, the harness that's in here is a 99 on the 302. This harness was an earlier one, so it already had these EV1 connectors on it. So I didn't have to change them like I did on that harness. But another thing that it did not have, and this is something I haven't mentioned yet, that this harness does not have that this one does, is actually the plug for the alternator. So this is your two wires that control your alternator. There's 3 wires total. This is your power out. One of these is like a 30 amp, the other one goes to the gauge. Now that green one right there, the small one, that goes to your gauge cluster. If it's not hooked up, your vehicle won't charge. I found this out the hard way because the harness on mine never had that. So while that one's already wired, I already showed you, the earlier harnesses had the charge connector built into the vehicle. And so I had to cut it out of a different vehicle and wire it into this plug myself that goes to the vehicle that we just looked at. So you will run into that. Now, this was already a factory addition on that later harness, like I said. So if you have an earlier one like I did, this was a 97 harness. This was a 97 Mountaineer. Yours will not have the alternator plug. So one way, if you're running this with something that has a different gauge cluster, I've tested this recently, you can basically run that yellow wire to a 30 amp power source with a fuse. That smaller wire, if you run a 470 ohm resistor to, I think, ground or power, I'd have to look it up. You run a 470 ohm resistor and then you'll get a charge. So really you could convert this to a one wire. If you ran, I believe it's power, you run a 470 ohm resistor from this wire to this big fat one. Then you only have to hook up the big fat yellow one, hook it up somewhere on a 30 amp relay, boom, you got a 2-wire alternator. So that's all I wanted to say on that. As far as the transmission plug, you can see it used to be here. I don't have it anymore. So what I did was I traced all the wires back and I pulled them out of the ECU plug. You can disassemble this and depin it. So I depinned all the wiring for the automatic transmission. All that I'm left with is these, which are for the reverse backup lights. You can see I have a tap for my rear view camera right there. And this, which is the post-cat O2 sensor. That's all you need from that. So like I said, there is a difference between the later and earlier automatic transmission plug. I don't know what they are off the top of my head, but I can tell you guys that we might look at that. If you have any questions about that, let me know. I hope this was helpful for you. If I didn't cover something that you'd like to see, let me know for the next one.